Third thing, read to identify. And this is where we're going in, and now we've read it, we know what's happening in the story. We now can, tell the story ourselves in our own language so we really get it, right? Now we're going to start looking at, okay, well, what are the things that are going on in the story? What are possible themes? And so this is where you would go in and look for things like, okay, is he afraid? Where do I see every place that he seems to be afraid? Right? Racism is another possible thing that you could look at. So I can go through and I can mark every place where I think or I see racism, either indirect or direct, right? And we'll talk about that when we look at the story, right? So again, you'll see in Brightspace a module about the themes, and I've listed quite a few that as I've taught this, these are things that students talk about, these are things that I've seen. So you can look at that and just see, where do you see those possible themes going on, right? But just because something isn't on the list doesn't mean that it's not a theme. Those are just, as I see something different, I'll add it to it, right? And what I like to do when I am doing these first 3 steps, right, is I like to look at my paper, and on one side, usually the right side of the column, the blank margin, that's where I start identifying themes, right? On the left side is where I make comments and ask questions, that kind of stuff, right? So I have a clear distinction between what I do on one side and what I do on the other. And the reason I do this is because it's really nice when I'm getting to step 4, read to interpret, being able to just look at the right side of my page to see, I go through and I'll look at, okay, let me look at just the places where I see fear, where I've labeled it there's fear. And I just read the whole story looking for those passages where I've labeled it fear. Because being able to kind of pull them all out and look at them together kind of maybe helps me say, okay, when I look at all of these things together, what do I think is going on here? And then the same thing with racism. I can look at just all of those. I can look at maybe all the places where he talks about imperialism, right? And what it is, or evil, or, whatever, right? And I can pull them out and I can say, okay, when I look at all of these times that he has said this or he's done something that reveals this, right? What do I think I can take away? What do I think the meaning is here when I look at just all of these places that have to do with whatever the theme is that I'm seeing, right? And that's where you can start then interpreting, right? So then on the left side is where I've asked questions if I don't understand something, and sometimes those questions can lead to the thesis that you want to argue, right? Because it's in answering that question that maybe you get, oh, that's a good thing right here, right? Why does he do this? Right? If I say, like, why would somebody say that? Maybe when I add up all the times that he's done something like that, I say, you know what? That's really a reflection of someone dehumanizing other people, right? And so by answering that question, maybe I find what I want to argue. That one of the takeaways from this story is about how it's easy to humanize other people, right? And then again, I'm also on that left side just making any kind of insightful comments that I've thought about. Any connections. Oh, this reminds me of what I read the other day in the newspaper, right? Anything like that. So again, that's the way I do it. You don't have to do it. Sometimes I use post-it notes. I get those post-it notes that have the lines on them, right? And I'll put that on a page and I'll write down vocabulary words. Like if I don't know a term, I'll write the term down and I'll define it and I'll keep that on that page so that when I reread it, I don't have to stop. Oh my God, now what did that word mean, right? I've got the definition right there. Sometimes if I'm wanting to make sure I don't overly mark up a page, or if I'm using a book and I can't write on it, I'll use the post-it notes, and that's how I'll make my comments, about that page instead of writing on the text. So again, find a method that works for you, right? And you can try out different kinds of methods, but again, you have to suit your own style and your own method, all right? So again, number 4 then is going back and looking at, well then what do I think is going on here? Right. Then after you've read to interpret and you've kind of focused on what you think you want to do, because again, when you're arguing what meaning is, that's interpreting, right? Now you go back and you start looking for the evidence. Okay, if I want to argue that, this story is about how fear can lead to loss of identity, right? And I have marked all the places where I see fear, and I've matched them up with every place where he talks about not knowing who he is or who he thinks he has to be or whatever, right? And I've made a connection. Now I get to say, okay, if I'm going to argue that, where can I find, or what are the exact things in the story that I can use to support that? So now you go back and you look for, and I'm not saying that these have to be specifically separate stages. The more you do this, the more comfortable you are with analyzing, the more some of these things kind of take place at the same time. So oftentimes when I'm reading to interpret, I'm also marking themes, and I'm kind of building up this interpretation as I go along, and I'm making notes, and I'm circling, thinking, oh, this would definitely be a good way to support this point, right? So I can, overlap the themes if I need to, but these are all the things that you need to be doing when you are interpreting the story, okay? And so again, how to start is this section right here is more about what to do specifically with this story, right? And then that last part right there is in general, what do you do with any story? Okay, so again, look at them as those ways. And again, you can see lots of other tips here about, how do we analyze, the idea that oftentimes authors are very cryptic, right? They don't want to necessarily come right out and tell you. They want to hint at it. They want you to work for it, right? That's one of the differences in literature and actual essays. In essays, especially academic essays, we're very explicit. It's our job to tell our readers what we think and provide the evidence to convince them. We're not trying to hide things. We're not trying to make them work to understand. We're laying it out for them. But in literature, right, the idea is to suggest, to hint, right, to make the reader think and reflect. Right? Now, essays, we do want readers to reflect, but we want to reflect them to reflect in a different way than oftentimes literature functions as, right? So in an essay, I want to be very clear in what I believe about something, and then I want them to take it and then think about how does that apply to them? Where do they agree or disagree with my points? But in literature, sometimes I'm just wanting the reader to try to figure out, what does that mean? Why did she kill him? Right? Why did he choose that path instead of the other? Why did he lose his sense of morality? Right? How did this person fall so far? Right? That's the difference in literature and essay writing. Okay? So again, this gives you some tips about, maybe how to approach that. Okay? All right, so let's go back and let's look at the analyzing and interpreting